Welcome to the deep dive. Sometimes the biggest economic stories, the real comeback tales, they happen in places you might not immediately think of. Imagine an industry really vital facing a couple of tough years, and then boom, just this incredible resurgence. That's what we're looking into today. We're digging into India's two-wheeler export industry. It's just seen this really remarkable surge. We've been going through the latest data, market reports, trying to get a real sense of what's driving this and, importantly, what it all means.
Exactly. And our goal here is to really unpack this surge for you. We want to look at who the main players are, the companies making it happen, and also what's going on in global markets that's fueling this kind of growth. Because it's more than just numbers on a page. It really tells a story about global economics, about strategy, and frankly, about how these vehicles impact everyday life for millions of people. Mobility, opportunity, it's all tied up in there.
Okay, let's get into it then. The headline numbers themselves are pretty striking. So for the fiscal year 2025 FY25, India's two-wheeler exports just soared. We're talking 21.4% growth compared to the previous year. That translates to over 4.1 million units shipped out globally.
Right. And what makes that number really pop is the context. This wasn't just a little bump. The sector actually saw declines for 2 straight years before this FY23 and FY24. So this is a significant turnaround, a real comeback story.
It really is. And you mentioned the importance of this sector. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Why is it such a big deal for India?
Well, it's huge. It's not just part of the automotive industry. It's really a cornerstone. Think about the jobs, manufacturing, sales, service, the whole supply chain.
Yeah.
Then there's the foreign exchange it brings in, which is vital for economic stability, helps balance the books. And it builds India's brand globally, shows manufacturing capability, reliability. Exports like these are, frankly, a lifeline for managing trade deficits.
That makes sense. And it sounds like June 2025 was a particularly strong month within this surge.
It really stood out, yeah. You can almost picture it, can't you? These Indian-made bikes and scooters buzzing around all over the world like, a delivery rider zipping through traffic in Legos on a Bajaj Pulsar. It happens all the time.
Or maybe a farmer in Brazil getting their goods to market on a TVS bike.
Exactly. They're not just vehicles. They're tools for work, for connection, for daily life. And they're coming from India. It really highlights the global reach.
So who are the companies driving this? Let's look at the individual players. Their performance in June tells quite a story. Bajaj Auto, for instance, they led the pack, right? About 18% growth.
Yeah, they exported almost 150,000 units just in June. Very strong.
And didn't they make a big move in Brazil recently, setting up a plant there?
They did. Manufacturing the Dominar models locally in Brazil, that's a major strategic play. It's not just shipping boxes anymore. It's about embedding themselves in the market. Local production, local jobs.
Yeah.
It really deepens their presence. Quite a smart move.
Definitely changes the game. Who knew Brazil would be the new Pune for two-wheelers, so to speak?
Well, it shows how global these companies are thinking. And these individual successes, they aren't just random luck. It points to a very deliberate, wider strategy. These numbers reflect targeted efforts to get into specific markets and, crucially, adapting the products.
Adapting how, exactly?
Well, think about it. What works in urban India might not be perfect for rural Africa. So maybe it's less about top speed and more about, say, really rugged suspension for rough roads, or making sure spare parts are cheap and easy to find. That kind of hyper-localization can be a huge advantage, even against lower-cost competitors sometimes.
That makes perfect sense. So it's not one size fits all.
Not at all. And TVS Motors is another great example.
Right, the numbers were huge too, up something like 58%.
Yeah, massive jump. Over 100,000 units exported in June. They have a really strong foothold in Africa and Latin America.
With models like the Apache series, which are super popular.
Exactly. And they're even pushing their electric scooter, the iQuib, into some of these markets. So they're looking at current demand and future trends. Sustainability is on their radar. And the list goes on, right? Hero MotoCorp saw an enormous leap.
Astonishing, really. 140% jump for Hero. Almost 29,000 units. They are seriously expanding their global reach now.
And Royal Enfield. Those classic bikes seem to travel well.
They certainly do. A 79% increase for Royal Enfield, over 12,500 units, shows that classic design and quality have enduring appeal globally.
Even Honda Motorcycle and Scooter India, they saw steady growth too, around 10%.
Yep, solid growth from Honda, over 40,000 units, which, is still very healthy growth. Not everyone can jump 140% every month.
True. You need superpowers for that.
but it underlines that the whole sector is doing well. It's broad-based demand. And connecting it back, like we said, it's all about smart strategy, understanding consumers in Nigeria, Brazil, Indonesia, delivering what they need, often at a price point that works. That's key for getting in and staying there.
Okay, so we've seen the huge growth and the who the company's making it happen. Let's get to the really crucial question, why? What's actually fueling this export boom right now? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there isn't just one single answer. It's really a mix of factors coming together. First off, a big one is economic recovery in key export markets. Think about regions like Africa, Latin America, also the ASEAN countries in Southeast Asia. As their economies pick up steam, people just have more money to spend. And affordable, reliable transportation like a two-wheeler often becomes a priority purchase, sometimes a necessity.
So better economic times overseas means more buyers for Indian bikes. Makes sense.
Precisely. Then, somewhat indirectly, but still important, is the situation back in India itself. Good monsoon seasons and strong agricultural output recently that boosts rural incomes within India.
Okay, but how does that help exports?
Well, it creates a positive economic feeling overall. It means the manufacturing base is strong, production lines are humming, and there's capacity to meet both domestic and export demand efficiently. It creates a healthy foundation.
Ah, I see. So a strong home base supports the export push.
Exactly. And then there's the broader financial picture globally. We're seeing inflation ease in many places, and critically, interest rates are coming down in some of these key markets.
Lower interest rates make loans cheaper, right? Easier to finance a bike.
Bingo. Makes
Yeah.
buying much more accessible for a lot of people. When financing is affordable and inflation isn't eating away at purchasing power quite so much, people are just more willing to make that kind of investment.
Okay, so favorable economics abroad, strong base at home. What else?
And the strategic piece we touched on earlier, it's crucial. Companies like Bajaj and TVS aren't just passive players. They are actively expanding, setting up local plants like Bajaj in Brazil, tailoring their bikes for local conditions, building dealer networks. They're really competing hard, embedding themselves in these markets. It feels like, India Inc. is bringing its A game strategically, and it's working.
That's a really clear picture of the drivers. But, even with all this positive momentum, there are usually some potential bumps in the road, right? Especially looking ahead, maybe with EVs.
Oh, absolutely. There are always challenges to keep an eye on, and yes, EVs are a good example there. But before we get to the challenges, maybe let's look a bit closer at what kinds of bikes are actually being exported.
Good idea. Is it mostly motorcycles? Scooters?
Motorcycles are definitely still dominant. Models like the Bajaj Pulsar, the TVS Apache, they're incredibly versatile. People use them for commuting, for business, like small deliveries, especially in developing markets. They're workhorses.
Right. And scooters?
Scooters, especially the automatic ones like Honda's Activa or the TVS Jupiter, they're really gaining ground. Particularly popular with urban commuters, easier to handle in dense city traffic.
And then the electric ones, the EVs, like the TVS iQube you mentioned.
Yeah, that segment is growing, definitely. There's increasing demand for sustainable options, but it's still a smaller part of the total export volume. And this brings us back to that challenge you hinted at, the supply chain. Especially for EVs, getting enough rare earth magnets is a real headache.
Why are those magnets so critical?
They're essential components for the electric motors in most current EV designs.
Yeah.
And the tricky part is, the mining and processing are heavily concentrated in just a few countries.
So it creates bottlenecks and dependencies.
Exactly. It's a geopolitical issue as much as an industrial one. Securing a stable supply is a major strategic challenge for anyone wanting to scale up EV production significantly. It's something everyone's grappling with.
That adds a layer of complexity, for sure. But focusing back on the current success, those examples you gave earlier in Nigeria, Brazil, really bring the impact home.
They do. In Nigeria, you really can't overstate how visible Bajaj and TVS are. They're used for everything, especially Okada taxi services and deliveries. Affordability and durability are just paramount there.
And Brazil, with Bajaj competing head-to-head now thanks to that local plant.
Right. It shows they're not just exporting, they're becoming a local player, competing directly with established brands. It's a big step.
And Indonesia, too. Scooters are big there.
Huge. With the growing middle class and improving roads in cities like Jakarta, scooters from TVS and Honda are incredibly popular for daily commuting. It's meeting a very real need.
It's amazing to think about these bikes weaving through such different cultures and economies worldwide.
And we shouldn't forget the role of supportive policies. Things like India's production-linked incentive scheme, The PLI scheme that gives financial boosts for manufacturing and exporting.
How does that work, basically?
Essentially, it rewards companies for increasing their production and sales, especially for export. It incentivizes them to scale up.
And things like free trade agreements, do they help?
Oh, significantly.
Yeah.
FTAs, for example, with the Asian bloc, reduce or eliminate import tariffs in those countries. That makes Indian bikes cheaper for consumers there, much more competitive against rivals. It's like getting an export passport with easier entry.
Okay, so putting it all together, strong demand, smart strategies, supportive policies. What's the net effect on India's economy from all this export growth?
It's substantial, really. First, as we mentioned, there's the foreign exchange. Every bike sold abroad brings in dollars, euros, whatever, strengthening the rupee, helping that trade balance. Think of each bike as a mini economic ambassador.
Okay, Forex is one.
Jobs, jobs, jobs. More exports mean more work, not just on the assembly line, but for part suppliers, logistics companies, sales teams, service centers. It ripples through the economy.
And does it spur innovation?
Absolutely. Competing globally forces these companies to up their game constantly. Better technology, better designs, more efficiency. And those improvements often benefit Indian consumers too when they filter back into the domestic market. Raises the bar for everyone.
And I guess it just builds India's reputation as a manufacturing hub.
Definitely. Success in a visible sector like automobiles really enhances the Made in India brand worldwide. It can open doors for other Indian industries too. It builds confidence.
So lots of positives, but let's revisit those challenges. You mentioned the EV supply chain. What else keeps manufacturers up at night?
Well, competition is always fierce, particularly from Chinese manufacturers, who often compete very aggressively on price. So Indian companies constantly need to differentiate through quality, features, service networks, and that localized adaptation we talked about.
Right, staying ahead of the curve.
Then there's the supply chain issue for EVs, especially those rare earth magnets. That's a big one. Trying to secure stable, reliable sources is strategically vital. It's like trying to bake a cake without flour if you can't get key components.
A critical ingredient missing, potentially.
Exactly. And finally, you always have the broader risks. Geopolitical instability in certain regions can disrupt markets. Currency fluctuations can suddenly make your products more expensive or cheaper, affecting demand unpredictably. These are things largely outside a company's direct control, but have to be managed.
So a complex landscape. But despite these hurdles, the outlook seems pretty positive.
Very optimistic, actually. The industry forecasts are bullish. There's talk that for the next fiscal year, FY26, exports could even break the previous record high set back in FY22.
Which was around 4.44 million units, right?
That's the number.
Yeah.
So potentially setting a new all-time high. And the key regions everyone's watching for that sustained growth are Africa, Brazil, and Southeast Asia. Those seem to be the powerhouses for demand right now.
It really has been an incredible journey for India's two-wheeler industry. From those couple of down years to this powerful resurgence, it shows real resilience, smart strategy.
It absolutely does. A combination of recovering global demand and very targeted efforts by the manufacturers, supported by policy.
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
It does. And maybe a final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder. As we see countries like India stepping up, becoming major players in sectors maybe we didn't traditionally associate them with on a global scale, what does that signal? What does it tell us about how global manufacturing, trade, and even economic influence are shifting? How might these changes redefine, who we see as the centers of innovation and industrial power in the years ahead? Something to chew on.